The Master Sword, a blade so legendary that its story is encountered in almost every game in the Zelda franchise. However, while it's a staple of the series, the stories surrounding its origin are weird. They don't always make sense, and in some games they even get outright ignored and we don't really know why. So today we will dive into the history of the Master Sword to solve this confusing mess. Alright, we will be looking at the very thing that confuses me the most. The origin of the Master Sword. Because there are actually two different stories for it. Now, all of us know the most common one, where the Master Sword was originally crafted by the goddess Hylia as the Goddess Sword, and later on it was forged into the Master Sword by the goddess's chosen hero and its spirit Vi. They then bathed it in the 3 sacred flames located across the land that would become the Kingdom of Hyrule. And Din's flame in particular imbued the sword with the power to repel evil, a power that was augmented after the sword received the blessing of Zelda, which transformed the blade into the true Master Sword. And usually this is the only sword that can defeat Ganon in the game it appears in, with the sword often choosing or accepting its master by its own will, always going for a hero who has gone through great trials that test his courage, wisdom and power to prove him worthy of wielding it. And it might be that this choice is made by the conscious being of the sword known as Vi, who sleeps eternally within the sword and only assists her heroic master. Now, this is a story that we all know. It was introduced back in the year 2011, when the Wii was conquering the world and the motion control heavy Skyward Sword came out. This game set the stage for the whole Zelda universe. It's right at the beginning of the timeline after all. However, there's actually another completely different origin story for this weapon as well, one that we have known about for years, even though many people have never heard of it before in their entire life. Until the release of Skyward Sword, the origin of the Master Sword was never seen, and only alluded to in what could be considered legends that were corrupted by oral tradition, and mistranslations from Japanese have further clouded the facts. And all of this started quite a while back in the 3rd game of the franchise, which was released in 1992. For instance, according to the English manual of A Link to the Past, after Ganon entered the Golden Land and obtained the Triforce, the people of Hyrule forged a sword resistant to magic, which could even repulse powers granted by the Triforce. After this, the 7 sages searched for one worthy of wielding the Master Sword, but they never found such a person, leaving them, with the aid of the Knights of Hyrule, to seal away Ganon instead. Now, although the mistranslated English manual states that the Master Sword was not created until after Ganon invaded the Golden Land, the Japanese manual states that it was forged long before those events. And so the location of the blade was already forgotten by the time of the Imprisoning War, and no hero was found worthy of wielding it. That's also why we never knew where to find the Master Sword in the game. All we could find out is that it was somewhere in the Lost Woods, apparently. Now, in the end, this notion that the Master Sword was forged to protect the Triforce is also supported by the fact that Hylia was the Triforce's guardian. But both the English and Japanese manual of A Link to the Past describe that the Master Sword was forged by the people of Hyrule, and not necessarily by the ancient sages, or even Hylia. Now, at the ending of A Link to the Past, it's said that the Master Sword sleeps again forever, after which Link places it back. But as we all know, in A Link Between Worlds, which is set after this game, Link once again takes up the Master Sword to beat Ganon. So that wasn't really accurate. Clearly, this story is very different from the story presented in Skyward Sword, and also conflicts with it a lot. It's quite obvious that Nintendo completely retconned the story, making the one from Skyward Sword, quote-unquote, canon. But it certainly wasn't the first game that offered an explanation for the Master Sword's origin. And you gotta remember, A Link to the Past was also the first game it was seen in. So we actually have 2 origin stories for the Master Sword, both being valid in my opinion. But it doesn't end there, because of course there's another game that has something to say about it all, The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess. In this game, Princess Zelda mentions that the ancient sages crafted the Master Sword and not the people of Hyrule. To be more precise, this is what she exactly says in the game itself. our world is one of balance. Just as there is light to drive away darkness, so too is there benevolence to banish evil. Head for the sacred grove that lies deep within the lands guarded by the spirit Pharaon. There you will find a blade of evil's bane that was crafted by the wisdom of the ancient sages. The Master Sword. The Master Sword is a sacred blade that evil can never touch. Evil cloaks you like a dark veil, and that blade is the only thing that can cleave it. So now, in this game, Princess Zelda, who is the leader of Hyrule in this game, and knows all the family's secrets regarding their struggles against Ganondorf and keeping the Triforce safe, says the information from A Link to the Past isn't accurate. So what is true now? Well, personally, I think Zelda makes a good point. It appears that the sages are always involved when it comes to the Master Sword. A great example of this is seen in the Wind Waker. Here the Master Sword lies in a hidden chamber in Hyrule Castle, deep beneath the waves of the Great Sea. And in this game, we learn that Ganon murdered the sages of Earth and Wind. Thanks to this, the Master Sword edge has dulled and its power to repel evil has faded completely. Which doesn't really make sense when you think about the origin story introduced in Skyward Sword, but hey, we're not going to get into that. And so eventually in the game, Link must awaken 2 new sages in order to regain that lost power of the sword. It is then explained that those sages are necessary in order to pray to the gods for the Master Sword and the hero who wields it, to restore its edge, and to keep it glowing with the power to repel evil. Now, again, why this wasn't the case in Skyward Sword is a mystery, but we're not going to get into that. Those are just Nintendo inconsistencies. And we gotta keep in mind this game came out before Skyward Sword, so the new origin story created in that game had nothing to do with the story seen in this game. So clearly, regardless of what they say in A Link to the Past, the sages from the past and even the ones seen in the current time are involved with making the sword what it is. However, this doesn't necessarily mean that the statement in A Link to the Past is completely wrong. Actually, when you really look into it, you can figure out how they made it in the end. It all started with the Hylian blacksmiths making the blade itself, a sword made from quite a special material. It's known as Master Ore, which can be found inside a Dark Palace, Thieves' Hideout, Skull Woods, and the Sanctuary of Hyrule. And I think this ore was used to make the Master Sword a long time ago, all to fight potential evil that would come for the Triforce. We even get some sort of proof for all of this, because this material can be used to upgrade the Master Sword in A Link Between Worlds. Each upgrade requires 2 chunks of Master Ore, with the first upgrade being done by the blacksmith in Hyrule, while the second upgrade is done by the blacksmith in Lorule. And each time the Master Sword is upgraded, its attack power is doubled, which clearly shows off that normal mortal beings can empower this sacred blade. And something similar to this has been seen in other games as well, like A Link to the Past, which is the prequel to A Link Between Worlds. But what about the sages then? Well, they also played a role in all of this, of course. They blessed the blade with their magical power, combining all their might, channeling it into the sword so it could defeat magic spells like the barrier around Hyrule Castle from the Wind Waker, and of course destroy evil like Ganondorf. Zelda even specifically mentioned the sages their wisdom. And so with these forces and people all working together, they were able to create something out of this world. A weapon that is the strongest on the planet. A perfect sword for destroying evil villains like Vati, Ganondorf, and of course a demon king like Malladus. Or Demise. However, now that we know all of this, why did Nintendo change all of this when Skyward Sword was released? And is that story a better fit than this one? Well, I don't exactly know why Nintendo did this. I bet it was to make the story of the franchise more clear, because it was a bit of a mess, as you could have noticed in this video so far. However, with a new origin story for the villain, Master Sword, and even main characters of the series, Nintendo could make a timeline out of it. Now, it's certainly not flawless, because many people, including me, have found lore-related issues in it, but it does make everything more clear overall. However, personally, I quite like the alternate stories found in the older games before the timeline and Skyward Sword were even a thing. And I think this explanation for the origin of the Master Sword fits even better than the one we see in Skyward Sword. It makes it more epic, and that's mostly because it has a legend surrounding it. Talking about ancient figures who had insane amounts of power, using all of it to create this one blade. In my opinion, something like this fits a lot better with an ancient and all-powerful weapon, shrouding it in a bit of mystery, making it more intriguing, similar to the ancient Sheikah technology seen in Breath of the Wild. And to be honest, all the information in this video is 100% canon, whether Nintendo likes it or not. We can kind of choose which one we like more, or even combine them to an extent. But overall, this shows off how confusing the history of the Master Sword can be, because there's more than one explanation. But what do you think of all of this? Does this other explanation for the Master Sword's origin make any sense? And which origin story do you like more? Let me know in the comments, and then I will see all of you in the next video.